Today I start my new series on storing food for long-term storage. Welcome to Urban Prepping with Pam. I'm Pam. Okay, finally, at long last, I'm starting my series on what foods to store and more importantly, quantities of food to store for an emergency. Now, an emergency could be a natural disaster. It could be the loss of a job. It could be somebody in your family suddenly has to move in, or maybe their whole family has to move in, and now you're faced with 5 more mouths to feed. It could mean COVID, which I discussed in my last video. It could be a gazillion different scenarios, and so it's just good practice to have food set aside. Right now, what's on my heart is that we have a lot of people in this country that are not working, and that's not through any fault of their own. There are a lot of people in the restaurant business, people in the salon business. There are so many businesses that I can't even think of where people are not working right now. And this is a real disaster for them. It is heartbreaking. So job loss really is it's a reality that can happen to any of us. And so the recommendation of food storage in the event that you lose your job is 6 months. They say you should have 6 months of food and 6 months of cash put aside in case of a job loss. So, maybe your goal isn't 1 year, maybe your goal is 6 months, and that's okay. You have to assess what's best for you and your family. And so for me and my husband, we're putting aside for 1 year. But that really isn't because we anticipate ever having to go a year without any income or anything coming in. But we have children and grandchildren. And so we figure, okay, well, we'll go ahead and we'll put aside for a year. But if there were some kind of a disaster of some kind and we had to help our children, then at least we know that we've got stores put aside to be able to help them. So that was our assessment for our household. So you need to do your assessment for your household. But just remember, the numbers I'm giving you now are for a 1 year supply. So if you want to cut that number in half and have 6 months, if that works for you, that's great. For me and my husband, it's 1 year. So today we're going to be talking about legumes. Last video, we talked about grains. And I keep a book. And I recommend that you write this down in a notebook or put it on paper right now and transfer it to a notebook when you get a notebook, because you do forget. So from the research that I did, these were the recommendations. Okay. Pinto beans. And the numbers I'll give you is per person, okay? I think that's easier than telling you what my husband and I just multiplied that by 2. So per person, what you're going to need are 30 pounds of pinto beans, 5 pounds of lima beans, 10 pounds of soybeans, 5 pounds of split peas, 5 pounds of lentils, and 5 pounds of dry soup mix. And I think when they're talking about dried soup mix, they're talking about a soup mix that has lentils or legumes in them, like a 16-bean soup mix or something like that. Now, when it comes to the legumes, I have made adjustments for my family. And you can move these numbers around, but what they're looking for is a total of 60 pounds per person. 60 pounds of legumes. We have surpassed that 60 pounds per person. but I've eliminated some things. I think I haven't even counted it. I think I do have dried lima beans, but it's just like in a glass jar. It's something that I've had for years, and I bought a long time ago, and to throw into soup or something. So, but I have not counted that. I did not go out. I don't have lima beans planned for long-term storage for our household. I do not have soybeans planned for. I will not eat soybeans. I won't do it. I just won't. So I don't have them in my house. Basically, what I've done is, now we've always had a large supply of pinto beans because we love beans and rice. And so I have always had a supply of pinto beans. And I like red beans and rice. So we've got a lot of red beans. So, like I said, I'm sure that we have surpassed. So it's 60 pounds per person. So for my husband and myself, that would be 120 pounds of beans. I think I'm probably a little over that because I buy in bulk. So I've got a lot of red beans. I've got a lot of pinto beans. And I have a lot of split peas. I love split pea soup. So I have more than 10 pounds of split peas. I bought a 25-pound bag, so I've got 25 pounds. But some of that's being used in my kitchen. I poured some of that aside. So, but I have more than the 10 pounds that they're recommending for my husband and myself. As far as dry soup mix, I don't really have that. I have a lot of other types of dried beans that if I wanted to, I could mix them up and make my own soup mix, which I probably will do just because it's kind of handy to have around. So I'm not counting any of those jars. I like to collect the green canning jars, those old vintage green canning jars. I don't use those jars for canning, and most of them can't be used for canning anyway because the tops are a little bit chipped. They stopped making those green canning jars back in 1937, so they've gotten plenty of use. But I do use them to store dried goods, and mostly the green jars that I have are used to store dried beans. Now my husband took them all down off of the shelf. They're on a table in my garage. One of the jobs I have to do is I really have to take an inventory and see what I got. I've bought black beans and oh gosh, I just have so many kinds of beans. I have brown lentils. Now, I like red lentils and I have yellow lentils. So I have three colors of lentils in jars. So I've really surpassed this recommended 10 pounds of lentils. I'm sure that I've at least reached the 10 pounds just in what I have in my canning jars out in the garage. So that's kind of easy, the legumes. Why do they want us to have legumes put aside for long-term storage? Well, they're loaded with protein. And if you make beans, basically, I'm just gonna say beans, but legumes. If you make beans and rice, that makes a complete protein, as if you're eating meat. So for long-term storage, and also really for a cheap meal, beans and rice are amazing. They really are amazing because it's as if you were eating meat, protein. It's imperative to have protein, especially if you're in an emergency situation. You may not have meat on hand. I hope you do. If you have meat in your freezer, maybe you've got a generator to keep that thing running, or like I do, I can a lot of my meat just so I don't have to worry about what's in my freezer. I know that I have meat in a freezer, but I also have meat in jars on my shelves that are shelf stable. So, and you can add meat. My husband likes to have sausage in his rice and beans, and so okay, that's fine. But in an emergency situation, if we have no meat, we could still live off of rice and beans if we had to. And if you like a variety of beans, now maybe you don't like pinto beans. Maybe there are people that love black beans. I don't love black beans. I have some. I've made them occasionally, but I don't go out of my way to make black beans. That's just because on a personal level, I don't really like them so much. But there are people that love black beans. Well, but maybe you don't like pinto beans so much. Well, then, you know what? Use black beans instead of pinto beans. You can certainly substitute with what I'm giving you here. So make sure that when you're doing long-term storage that you're storing foods that you like, because it's just a waste of money and it's a waste of food to put food away for long-term storage if you never eat it. And eventually the food that's in long-term storage, we rotate so that the food that's in, we're older. We don't have to worry about putting food away for 30 years. We're probably not going to be here in 30 years. So, and for us, that's not an issue. So, I mean, if I could just have food, if I could keep it for 5 years, I'll be happy. And if I'm rotating constantly, I can do that. Okay? I have a 1-year supply, but I'll rotate that. And that way I know that the food that I do have in long-term storage really hasn't been stored long-term. It's probably only been stored a year. I mean, that's my goal, is to be able to replace what I have yearly. And that's why we rotate. So I hope that helps you. This is a short one because that was about legumes. There's not a whole lot to say about legumes, but like I said, pick the ones that you like. If you don't like split peas, I know some people hate split peas. They hate peas. Don't buy split peas. Find something that you can replace it with that you do like. Maybe you like lentil stew. Well, then up the amount of lentils that you use. Just make sure that you have 60 pounds of legumes per person in your household. And that will be enough to get you through for 1 year. And again, you use those things and then rotate. When you use it, buy more. When you use it, buy more. That way it's always in constant rotation, but at least then you always have a year's supply. So again, I hope you found that helpful. The next video I'm going to do is fats and oils to have on hand in case of an emergency. So I'll see you for the next video. Bye-bye.